A software engineer discovered her pregnancy, and when sharing her desire to work remotely, her husband called her selfish. Children need a full-time mother, he snapped. The champagne he had bought to celebrate remained unopened. What happened? In the following months transformed their 7-year marriage and changed their lives forever. A journey of love, discoveries, and overcoming challenges that will touch your heart. Leave your like, subscribe, and comment on where you're watching from. A simple doctor's appointment changed everything. At 35, a respected software engineer at a multinational company, I found out I was 8 weeks pregnant. What should have been a moment of joy became the epicenter of a storm when, upon sharing the news with my husband, a 40-year-old traditional marketing executive, along with my desire to adapt my routine to work remotely, I was surprised by his reaction. "You're being selfish. Children need a full-time mother," he snapped, with the conviction of someone who doesn't accept arguments. The scene took place in our dining room, where the aroma of the special dinner I had prepared still lingered in the air, while the champagne I bought to celebrate remained unopened. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words like stones. My throat tightened, but I kept my composure, as I had always done since childhood. That unopened champagne on the table seemed to mock my naivety. How could I have believed he would celebrate? Maybe the doctor was right when, upon giving me the positive result, she asked if I was ready for the changes. At the time, I thought she meant the physical changes, the birth, not the complete transformation that was being imposed on my identity. I am known for 3 striking characteristics: unwavering determination in the face of challenges, empathy for everyone around me, and a tendency towards perfectionism that makes me demand a lot from myself. My biggest internal conflict has always been balancing my professional ambition with the desire to build a harmonious family, something that was now becoming a reality more intensely than I had ever imagined. This perfectionism has brought me this far: the youngest engineer to lead international projects at the company, the daughter who never disappointed her parents, the wife who keeps the house spotless even while working 50 hours a week. Now, it seemed I would have to choose: be the professional or be a mother, as if both could not coexist in the same body, in the same life, as if, by creating a life, I needed to bury a part of myself. That night, lying in bed while Michael snored beside me as if he hadn't just shattered our world, I caressed my still flat stomach. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, to that tiny life growing inside me, a promise made not only to the baby, but mainly to myself. Over the next 9 months, our life turned into a roller coaster of emotions and events that tested our 7-year marriage like never before. In the first week after the announcement, I tried to initiate several conversations about the subject, only to encounter resistance. My husband, whose main motivation had always been to keep the family in the traditional mold in which he was raised in rural Pennsylvania, began to come home later and later from work. "Michael, we need to talk about how we're going to organize our routine when the baby is born," I tried again during dinner, 2 weeks after that first argument. "There's nothing to discuss, Jennifer. My mother raised 3 children without needing help or working outside the home. That's how family works," he replied, without even looking up from his phone. "Your mother lived in another time, in another economic reality," I argued, feeling my nails dig into the palms of my hands. "Besides, I'm not talking about abandoning the child. I'm talking about working from home. Working from home is still working. The baby will realize your attention is divided," he cut in, finally looking at me. "Do you really think you'll be able to code with a crying baby? Be realistic." Realistic. As if my dream of maintaining my career and being a mother was a teenage fantasy, and not a basic right. As if I were asking to climb Mount Everest in high heels, and not simply exist in my fullness. The tears I swallowed at that dinner went down bitter. Later, alone in the bathroom, I let them flow freely while the shower water masked my sobs. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger, frustration, and above all, fear. Fear of losing everything I had built. Fear of turning into that faded version of myself that I saw in so many women in my family, always around the table, serving others, never serving themselves. When I completed 3 months of pregnancy, the company where I work announced a restructuring, opening opportunities for promotion. I was nominated to take over a project management position, exactly what I had always dreamed of. The timing couldn't have been worse. My decision to accept the promotion, even while pregnant, intensified the conflict at home. My husband questioned my commitment to the family we were forming, while my mother-in-law, during a Sunday lunch with the traditional pot roast she always makes when she comes to visit us, suggested that I revisit my priorities. The atmosphere became so heavy that I could feel the weight in the air, along with the orange aroma of the dessert I barely managed to taste. "When I was expecting Michael," said Mrs. Clelia, as she served me a generous portion of pot roast that my nauseous stomach rejected. "I quit my job at the local government office without thinking twice. I never regretted it. No career is worth a child's infancy." I smiled politely, as I had since I met her, while thinking about the hypocrisy of that speech. Michael was the middle child. Who exactly took care of him when she was busy with the pregnancy of the youngest? These questions, of course, remained, only in my thoughts. "You're right, Mrs. Clelia. Everyone knows what's best for their family," I replied with a sweetness I didn't feel. "By the way, I heard that nowadays companies that value the presence of mothers have better productivity results. Curious, isn't it?" The matriarch's confused expression at my seemingly cordial but subtext-filled response was small consolation for the awkwardness of that lunch. Michael, as always, remained silent, drinking his beer and changing the subject to football with his father. Typical. At the meeting with my boss to discuss the promotion, I was direct about my pregnancy, something I hadn't yet formally communicated to the company. "Peter, before we finalize this promotion, I need to tell you something. I'm 3 months pregnant." His face went through several expressions in seconds. Surprise, then something that looked like disappointment, and finally a professional neutrality. "Well, Jennifer, congratulations. This complicates things a bit." "Complicates why?" "I will take my maternity leave, yes, but I have a plan to ensure the transition and continuity of the projects. I don't doubt your competence, but management sometimes requires 24/7 availability." "And do you think being a mother will make me less available than managers who go golfing on weekends or take care of elderly parents?" I questioned, keeping my tone calm, but feeling my face heat up. The silence that followed carried all the truth that our society avoids facing. It wasn't about availability. It was about the perception of commitment, about the invisible stigma that pregnant women carry in the corporate environment. "I'm going to prove that I can do both, Peter. And I'm going to do it well." I left his office with the promotion confirmed, and an even greater weight on my shoulders. The disbelief I saw in his eyes was the same I found in Michael's, my mother-in-law's, even some friends. I would need to prove something that no man has ever needed to, that being a parent does not diminish your professional capacity. In the 4th month, I found out that a former colleague, now a director at another technology company, had implemented a flexible maternity program with exceptional results. She agreed to mentor me on how to balance career and motherhood. Simultaneously, I found an online support group for pregnant professional women, where stories similar to mine were shared. These discoveries gave me the confidence to present my boss with a detailed hybrid work proposal for after my maternity leave. "Helen, you don't know how good it is to hear your voice," I confessed over the phone to my former colleague. We had scheduled coffee, but she had to cancel at the last minute because her son had a fever. "Sorry for the cancellation. Being a mother and a director means there's always something on fire somewhere." She laughed. "But don't worry. There are quiet days too." "How do you manage?" "My husband acts like I'm committing a crime by wanting to keep my career." "Look, Jennifer, I'll be honest. It's hard. There are days when you'll feel like a failure in both roles. But you know what I've discovered? That perfection is a myth created to keep us insecure. The truth is that when I'm working, I'm 100% director. When I'm with my son, I'm 100% mother. The quality of time matters more than the quantity." That conversation was like oxygen to someone drowning. For the first time since I found out I was pregnant, I felt I had an ally who understood my internal struggle. More than that, she proved it was possible to survive it. In the online group Helen recommended, I found dozens of women sharing everything from practical strategies to emotional support. I realized my situation was not unique. It was epidemic. During a sleepless night, When the lower back pain was already starting to appear, I drafted a detailed hybrid work proposal. I researched case studies, productivity data, benchmarks from other companies in the sector. I built an irrefutable presentation with metrics and projections that any manager would appreciate. The draft turned into a 15-page document that, in a way, defined me more than any resume. The methodical engineer and the future mother coexisting on the same plane. In the 5th month, while we were organizing the baby's room, I found an old family album of my husband's. The photos revealed that his mother, always presented as a dedicated housewife, had actually worked as a teacher until he was 12 years old. When I confronted him with this information, I witnessed his first moment of genuine reflection. My father always talked about how important it was for my mother to be at home, he confessed, confused. This revelation opened space for a more honest conversation about his expectations and fears. It was a rainy Saturday when I found the dusty album in a box Michael brought from his parents' attic. While he assembled the crib, a task he took on with a dedication that surprised me positively. I leafed through the yellowed pages. Among photos of birthdays and Christmases, I found an image that made me frown. Mrs. Clelia, much younger, in front of a rural school wearing a white coat and holding a book. Behind her, a blackboard with equations. Michael, was your mother a teacher? He looked up from the assembly instructions, confused. No, why? I showed him the photo, and several more I found on the following pages. Mrs. Clelia at a graduation, receiving a certificate, correcting notebooks at a desk. This must be from before I was born, he murmured, examining the dates written in pen on the margins. His expression changed as he realized that several photos were from when he was already a child. She taught at the rural school until you were about 12, it seems, I observed, keeping my tone neutral despite the internal turmoil. Strange she never mentioned it at Sunday lunches, don't you think? Especially when the subject is working mothers. Michael sat down next to me on the bed, still holding the screwdriver he used to assemble the crib. Silence weighed between us as he processed the information. My father always said we were lucky to have a full-time mother, he finally said, his voice carrying genuine confusion. He said that especially when comparing our family to my cousins, who had a lawyer mother. Maybe the story he told didn't exactly match reality, I suggested gently. Sometimes we create narratives that reinforce our beliefs, even if they're not completely true. Michael remained silent for a few minutes, leafing through the album and finding more evidence of his mother's teaching career. When he finally spoke, his voice had a vulnerability he rarely showed. I think I've always idealized my childhood. In my memory, Mom was always there when I got home from school. Maybe she was only there for the important moments, and that was enough. That afternoon marked the beginning of a subtle change in Michael. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. Ingrained beliefs don't disappear with a single revelation. But for the first time since I announced my pregnancy, he seemed willing to question his own certainties. And that, for me, represented a small victory. The next day, during breakfast, Michael asked about my hybrid work proposal. Not to criticize, but to understand. I explained in detail how it would work, the necessary adaptations, the times of day I would reserve exclusively for the baby. He listened attentively, asking pertinent questions. It won't be easy, he commented finally. No, it won't, I agreed. But few things that are worthwhile are easy. He smiled slightly, for the first time seeming to see beyond the challenge, also seeing the determined woman he had married. The woman who, years ago, had impressed him precisely for her ability to turn obstacles into opportunities. At 6 months, during the ultrasound exam, we found out we were having twins, a boy and a girl. This unexpected news completely changed the dynamics. Suddenly, financial concerns became more relevant. During a candlelight dinner, I organized to talk. My husband admitted that his salary alone might not be enough to support 2 babies with the standard of living we wanted to maintain. Twins? Are you sure, doctor? I asked, feeling the exam room spin around me. The doctor just smiled, pointing to the screen where 2 small shapes moved. Absolutely. Look, here's the boy. And here the girl. 2 perfectly healthy babies. Michael beside me squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the 2 spots we soon identified as our children. 2, he murmured. 2 babies at the same time. The drive home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. What would already be a challenge with 1 baby had just doubled in complexity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, considering all the practical implications. We would need 2 cribs, 2 strollers, twice as many diapers, clothes, toys. The space we had set aside for the baby's room now seemed insufficient. And time. How to divide attention equally between 2 newborns. 3 days after that revelation, I prepared a special dinner. I put candles on the table, cooked the shrimp risotto that Michael loved so much, opened a bottle of wine, which I didn't drink, of course, but served to him. We needed to have a frank conversation, without interruptions, without distractions. I've been looking at our finances, I began after we finished dessert. With the arrival of 2 babies, our expenses will practically triple. Michael nodded, swirling his wine glass between his fingers. He seemed less defensive than usual, perhaps because of the atmosphere I had created, perhaps because of the shock of the twins' news that he hadn't yet fully absorbed. I made some projections. I continued, picking up the folder I had prepared. Even if we cut back on some luxuries, like trips and eating out, it would still be tight to maintain our apartment and the school we'd like for them on your salary alone. He examined the spreadsheets I had prepared, the meticulous calculations that had always been my forte. There was no escaping the math. Our financial reality was there, in black and white. I never imagined I'd have twins. He sighed finally. In fact, I never imagined I'd be a father before 45. Everything happened faster than we planned. Life rarely follows our plans exactly, I replied, feeling an unexpected tenderness for him in that moment of vulnerability. Jennifer, He hesitated, a visible conflict on his face. Maybe I've been unfair to you. When I said it was selfish to want to continue working, I was just repeating what I've heard my whole life. But these calculations don't lie. And with 2 children, it's not just about money, Michael, I interrupted gently. It's about building a family model together that works for us, not based on what others expect. I know, he agreed to my surprise. But money makes the conversation more concrete, less about ideologies and more about survival. That night marked a turning point in our relationship. Michael was finally beginning to see the situation from a practical perspective, not just through the lens of inherited traditions. Money, that seemingly mundane and yet so crucial topic, ended up being the catalyst for a deeper understanding. In the 7th month, my hybrid work proposal was approved, with the condition that I lead the implementation of a new software critical to the company. The project would require intense dedication for 6 months, coinciding with the birth of the babies. Simultaneously, my husband was invited to an opportunity abroad that he had always dreamed of, but which would require frequent travel. The meeting with Peter and the executive committee was tense. I presented my remote work proposal with the same precision and professionalism that I applied to the most challenging technical projects. I used data, success stories, studies from other companies in the sector. My already prominent belly seemed almost a silent counter-argument as I spoke about commitment and availability. "We are impressed with your proposal, Jennifer," said Peter after the presentations. "We have only one condition. The new management system needs to be implemented on schedule. I understand the importance of the project, but the schedule coincides exactly with my maternity leave period and the baby's first months," I argued, feeling a mixture of gratitude for the approval and apprehension for the imposed condition. "That's why we're offering total flexibility of hours and location," replied the HR director, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You deliver results. We don't question when or where the work was done." I left that room with a partial victory and a monumental challenge. The company was willing to adapt, but not to lower its expectations. I would have to prove that it was possible to be a mother of newborn twins and lead a critical project simultaneously. The responsibility was overwhelming. That same week, Michael came home with a sparkle in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "The agency is opening an office in Portugal, and they want me to lead the operation," he announced while I was organizing the baby's closet. Portugal? Does that mean moving? I asked, feeling a chill. Not necessarily. At least not now. It would involve frequent travel in the first few months to establish the operation. Then we could consider a permanent move if it's interesting for us. The timing couldn't have been worse. Michael traveling internationally just when the twins would be born. How would I manage everything alone? Especially with the company project. To deliver? It's a unique opportunity, Jennifer, he continued, noticing my hesitation. The kind of chance that comes along once in a career. The irony of the situation did not escape me. After months of criticizing my professional dedication, now it was he who was putting his career first. I took a deep breath, containing the sharp reply that was already forming in my mind. I understand its importance. To you, just as I hope you understand the importance of my career to me, I replied calmly. We're going to need a very well-structured plan if we both want to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. To my surprise, Michael didn't react defensively. Instead, he sat down next to me on the floor of the room, among boxes of diapers and tiny clothes. You're right, he conceded. We need to think as a team now. It's not about your work or mine, it's about our family functioning as a whole. That conversation, amidst packages of newborn-sized diapers and still-tagged onesies, was perhaps the most adult and balanced we had had since we found out about the pregnancy. Finally, it seemed we were speaking the same language. In the 8th month, during a weekend retreat in the mountains organized by mutual friends, we met an older couple who shared how they had successfully balanced 2 careers while raising 3 children. Their practical strategies and the evident complicity between them offered a vision of what we could build. At the same time, my sister-in-law, a mother of 3 and a respected doctor, offered to help us with the twins in the first few months, revealing that she had also faced similar dilemmas. The retreat in the mountains was Michelle's idea, my friend from college who realized how much Michael and I needed a break before the babies arrived. The place was perfect, a rustic lodge surrounded by pine trees, away from the pollution and noise of the city, with a view of the mountains that seemed to cleanse the soul. At dinner on the first night, we sat at the communal table next to a couple in their 60s, Sonia and Anthony. She, a retired former judge. He, a still active university professor. The conversation naturally flowed to the topic of family when they noticed my prominent belly. Twins. How wonderful, exclaimed Sonia. We had 3, with only 2 years difference between each. It was like having triplets for a good while. And how did you manage to reconcile everything? I heard you were a judge, weren't you? I asked, immediately interested in her story. Yes, and in the 80s, when being a woman in the judiciary was already a challenge. Imagine being a mother of 3. She laughed. Anthony and I developed a system. We alternated days of in-person and remote work, something rare at the time. But my position allowed some flexibility to work from home with cases. We had a schedule on the kitchen wall, Anthony added. It was almost like a military plan. Who took each child to school, who picked them up, who was on standby if someone got sick. And did it work? Asked Michael, with genuine interest. Most days, replied Sonia, exchanging a knowing look with her husband. And on the days it didn't, we improvised. The key was constant communication, and the understanding that both careers were equally important. Throughout the weekend, I observed the dynamics of that couple, the way they complemented each other in conversations, how they seemed to have developed their own language made of half smiles and glances. Sonia shared practical strategies, from how to organize the house to maximize efficiency, to how to maintain the couple's intimacy amidst the chaos of small children. On Sunday, while we were walking on an easy trail, the most my condition, aloud, Michael commented, "They're inspiring, aren't they? After almost 40 years together and they still seem in love." Yes, I agreed. And did you notice how neither of them seems resentful for career sacrifices? Because both gave in at some points and were prioritized at others. When we returned to the city, we found Lisa, Michael's sister and mother of 3 boys, waiting in front of our building. A renowned neurologist, she had always maintained a cordial relationship with me, but never a close one. "I heard you're expecting twins," she said after the greetings. and also that you both have important professional projects coinciding with the birth," Michael confirmed, looking slightly defensive, as he always did around his older and accomplished sister. "Well, I came to offer help," declared Lisa, pragmatic, as always. "I can rearrange my shifts to be available 2 nights a week for the first 3 months. It would be a relief for you to rest or work, whichever is more urgent." I was speechless at the unexpected offer. Michael looked equally surprised. "Don't make that face," she continued with a half smile. "I went through this when my twins were born, remember? Pablo was working in another city at the time. If it weren't for the support network I built, I would have gone crazy." "I never knew you went through that," confessed Michael. "It always seemed like you managed everything perfectly." "That's the biggest lie we tell women," replied Lisa with a sigh. "That some manage to do everything alone. No one does, Michael. No one." Lisa's offer and the example of Sonia and Anthony were like lights at the end of the tunnel. We realized we were not alone on this journey, and that asking for help was not weakness, but wisdom. A week before delivery, during a storm that caused a citywide power outage, we were without electricity for hours. By candlelight, we had the most sincere conversation of our relationship. My husband revealed his deep fear of repeating the mistakes of his own father, always emotionally absent despite being physically present. I shared my anxiety about losing my professional identity, built with so much effort. In this shared vulnerability, we found a new understanding. The storm began in the late afternoon. First the distant thunder, then the rain quickly turning into hail, and finally the entire neighborhood plunged into darkness. Michael lit the candles we kept for emergencies, and I connected my cell phone to the battery-powered radio to listen to the news. "Power is not expected to be restored until tomorrow morning," the announcer reported. "The power company advises everyone to stay in their homes if possible." I looked at Michael, his face partially illuminated by the flickering candlelight. 8 months of pregnancy had transformed my body, but also our relationship. We were different, more cautious with each other, more aware of each other's vulnerabilities. "Looks like we're having an old-fashioned night," I commented, trying to ease the tension that always hung between us when we were truly alone, without the distractions of work, television, or preparations for the babies. Michael smiled. That shy smile that won me over years ago when we were just 2 young professionals at a technology conference. "Remember our first trip together?" he asked. "That disastrous camping trip when it rained and we were stuck in the tent for hours. How could I forget? You tried to impress me by telling scary stories by flashlight and ended up being the first one scared by the noises of the forest." I laughed, feeling some of the old complicity return. We improvised dinner with what was in the fridge, cheeses, fruits, bread, and sat on the living room rug, as we did in the early years of our relationship, when the apartment had only the basic furniture. It was there, surrounded by the silence of the city, without power, and the constant drumming of rain on the windows, that we finally spoke without masks. "I'm afraid I won't measure up," confessed Michael after a long silence. His voice sounded different, deeper, truer. "When you told me about the pregnancy, my first reaction was panic. Not about the babies themselves, but about me." "How so?" I asked, surprised by his sudden vulnerability. "My father, you know, what he was like. He was always home, always physically present, but emotionally, it was like there was a glass wall between us. He provided, fulfilled the role of man of the house, but he never knew how to be a real father." Michael paused, his eyes reflecting the small flames of the candles. "I'm afraid I'll be like him, of not knowing how to connect, of not knowing how to show love." The confession caught me off guard. In 7 years together, Michael had rarely spoken about his father, who had passed away before we met. That austere man in the family photos, always with a serious expression, was almost a taboo. "That's why you insisted so much on the idea of a full-time mother," I realized, the pieces finally falling into place. "You believe I need to compensate for what you fear you won't be able to offer emotionally." He nodded, embarrassed. "It's ridiculous, I know. Transferring to you a responsibility that is actually my insecurity." "It's not ridiculous," I replied, reaching out to touch his face. It's human. We all carry the ghosts of our upbringing. It was my turn to open my heart. I told him about my fear of losing the identity I had built with so much effort, of being reduced only to the role of mother when I had fought my whole life to be recognized for my mind and competence. Do you have any idea how hard it was to get where I am? I asked, feeling the tears I had been avoiding for months finally escape. Every code I wrote, every system I developed, was a battle to prove that I deserved to be in that room, that I wasn't there because of a quota or luck, or a pretty face. You've never told me about this, said Michael, genuinely surprised. Because it's exhausting to explain. It's like a race where men start at the starting line and we women 100 meters behind, carrying extra weights. When we catch up to you, no one recognizes the extra effort. They just comment on how talented we are for being in the same place. And you're afraid of losing all that because of the babies, he stated, finally understanding. Not because of them, I corrected. Because of the social expectations about mothers. Because of the structural inequality that penalizes women when they become mothers, while it rewards men when they become fathers. That night, illuminated only by the slowly burning candles, we dismantled the armor we wore against each other. It was as if the blackout had darkened not only the city, but also the personas we maintained, allowing us to truly see each other for the first time in months. We can do things differently, affirmed Michael, holding my hands in his. We don't need to repeat the patterns we inherited. I can learn to be the father I never had, and you can be the mother you want to be without sacrificing who you are. That will require a different commitment from us, I replied. We'll have to rewrite the rules of our family. Then let's rewrite them together. When the power returned the next morning, something had changed between us. The external storm had brought about an internal clarity. It wouldn't be easy. We knew that. But now we were fighting side by side, no longer against each other. Lean. Twins were born healthy, bringing joy and exhaustion in equal measure. The first 2 months were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and sleepless nights. Against all expectations, my husband quickly adapted to fatherhood, demonstrating a natural ability that surprised everyone, especially his traditional mother. The delivery happened 3 days before the due date. Contractions started during a work video conference. Ironically, while I was presenting the implementation schedule for the new system I would be leading. I maintained professional composure until the end of the presentation, only a slight furrow in my brow betraying the gradually increasing pain. I think they decided the meeting was too boring, I joked with Michael when he arrived home in record time after my call. At the hospital, everything happened faster than we imagined. Henry was born first, at 8:42 p.m., with a strong cry that echoed through the room. Sophia came 7 minutes later, silent and observant, only letting out a small whimper when the nurse lifted her. "They're perfect," whispered Michael, tears flowing freely down his face as he held Henry for the first time. It was the first time I had seen him cry since we met. Adapting to the new reality was a shock, despite all the preparation. Simultaneous breastfeeding, sleep deprivation, hormonal imbalances. Nothing in the books or prenatal classes had truly prepared us for the intensity of that experience. In the first few days, Michael seemed lost, almost panicked by the two, tiny babies who depended completely on us. But then, something surprising happened. While I struggled with breastfeeding and postpartum hormones, he naturally took over everything else. Diaper changes, baths, rocking them in the middle of the night so I could rest between feedings. "He's unrecognizable," commented Mrs. Clelia when she came to visit us in the second week. She watched with astonishment as her son moved between the babies with a competence she clearly hadn't expected. "In my day, men didn't even know how to hold a baby." "Times change, Mom," replied Michael as he changed Sophia's diaper with the dexterity of someone who had been doing it his whole life. And, thankfully, they do. When my mother-in-law left, Michael confessed, "I discovered something about myself. I like taking care of them. It's not an obligation or a burden. It's comforting, somehow." I remembered his words during the blackout night, his fear of repeating his father's emotional coldness. What irony. His greatest fear had turned into his greatest strength. The determination not to be like his father had made him exactly the opposite, present not only physically, but emotionally connected. When the babies turned 3 months old, I implemented my hybrid work plan. The first few weeks were chaotic, with meetings interrupted by cries and deadlines extended due to lack of sleep. We hired a nanny recommended by my sister-in-law, but the adaptation was difficult. The twins rejected anyone who wasn't me or their father. The partial return to work proved to be a bigger challenge than I imagined. My makeshift office was in the guest room, just a wall away from the babies. The first few days were a test of patience. Attempts at teleconferences while Mariana, the nanny, tried to soothe one of the twins who was crying inconsolably on the other side of the wall. This isn't going to work, I despaired to Michael after a particularly difficult week, when I had to hang up in the middle of 3 different meetings, because the babies needed me. I think I underestimated the difficulty. We're just starting, he reminded me. Remember what Sonia told us? The first few months are the hardest. Then we find a rhythm. Sonia, thinking about that retired judge who raised 3 children, while building a brilliant career, gave me strength. If she managed in the 80s, with much less support and technology, surely I could manage too. Gradually, we adjusted the dynamics. I realized that trying to work while the babies were awake was counterproductive. I reorganized my schedule to concentrate meetings during their naps and more intense work at night, when Michael returned from the office and took over childcare. Mariana, initially challenged by the twins' resistance, developed her own relationship with them. We discovered that Henry calmed down with lullabies sung in a deep voice, while Sophia needed constant eye contact to feel secure. They have such distinct personalities, commented Mariana after a month with us. Henry is all emotion, reacts intensely to everything. Sophia observes, processes, seems to analyze the world before deciding how she feels. I smiled hearing that description. Henry, with his emotional intensity, reminded me of Michael's more expressive side. Sophia, analytical and observant, reflected something of my own personality. In the 5th month after the birth, I faced my first major professional challenge. The system I implemented experienced critical failures during the launch. I had to spend 3 full days at the office, leaving my husband alone with the babies for the first time. Upon returning, I found not the chaos I expected, but a confident husband who had created his own routine with the children. The crisis began on either a typical Tuesday. I was in the middle of a coding session when I received an urgent call from Peter, my boss. The new system had completely crashed during the data migration process, compromising critical company information. "I need you at the office, Jennifer," he said, his voice tense. "I know it's not the agreement, but it's an emergency." I looked at the twins, comfortably asleep in their cribs. Michael was in Portugal for the opening of the agency's office, his first international trip since the children were born. Mariana could stay longer hours, but not overnight, and the problem would require days of intense work. "I'll check what I can do and get back to you," I replied, my mind already calculating possibilities. A series of phone calls later, to my sister-in-law, to my mother, to Michael's mother. I managed to arrange a rotating schedule for the next 3 days. The logistics were complicated. Pumping breast milk, coordinated schedules between different caregivers, detailed instructions on the particularities of each baby. When I told Michael what was happening, he immediately offered to return. "No," I interrupted. "You've worked so hard for this opening. I'll manage." "Are you sure?" he asked, worried. "I can try to move my flight forward." "I am. It's important for your career, just as resolving this crisis is important for mine." Those were 3 exhausting days. I slept only a few hours a night on the sofa in the company break room, between marathon coding sessions and tense negotiations with the IT team. Pumping milk in the company bathroom, quick video calls to see the babies, a physical longing that ached like an open wound. On the 3rd day, when we finally solved the problem and the system was fully operational again, I burst into tears in the elevator on my way out. They weren't tears of sadness or exhaustion, although I was exhausted. It was a contradictory mix of guilt and pride. Guilt for having been absent, pride for having overcome a professional challenge that few in the company could have solved. When I opened the front door, I expected to find chaos, baby clothes scattered, dishes piled up, toys everywhere. Instead, I entered an organized apartment, with the aroma of home-cooked food in the air. Michael, who had returned from Portugal earlier despite my insistence, was in the living room with the twins, reading a story while they both watched him, with fascinated attention. "Welcome home, hero," he joked, looking up from the book. "You saved the company, and now you can rest. Dinner is almost ready." How did you manage?" I asked, marveling at the scene. He smiled, that new confident smile he had been developing since the babies were born. I realized I had never been alone with them for so long. I had to create my own methods, my own routine. At first it was scary, then it worked. That night, while he served the dinner he had prepared, he told me how he discovered that Henry calmed down when he heard jazz, how Sophia loved to be carried facing outwards, observing the world, how he established a sequence of activities that kept both entertained while he prepared their bottles. "I discovered something important," commented Michael while we ate. "Taking care of our children isn't just responsibility or duty, it's a privilege. These days alone with them were some of the most challenging, but also the most rewarding of my life. When they turned 6 months old, we held a celebration, typical of the rural Pennsylvania culture. A baby blessing ceremony, a tradition from my husband's family. During the party, which brought together 3 generations of relatives, my mother-in-law surprised everyone by giving an emotional speech about how her view on the role of women in the family had changed upon seeing us functioning as a true team. The baby blessing ceremony was a tradition I barely knew before marrying Michael. A simple ceremony but full of symbolism, where the babies receive the blessing of the elders of the family and are officially introduced to the community. We organized everything in the building's community room, decorated with wildflowers and typically Pennsylvanian elements, hand-embroidered tablecloths, traditional sweets, old family photographs. Mrs. Clelia took over the organization with enthusiasm, bringing typical dishes she had prepared herself from the countryside. For the first time since we met, we worked together in harmony, without the usual tensions about the correct role of each. During the ceremony, when the babies were presented to the guests, Mrs. Clelia asked for the floor. Everyone expected the traditional speech about the importance of family and old values, but what we heard was surprisingly different. When my son told me he was going to be the father of twins, I confess I was worried, she began, her voice trembling with emotion, especially when I found out my daughter-in-law would continue working. How will they manage? I thought, based on my own experiences from decades ago.